This next session, and the last session of the Craft Summit, is about these. I've called it Short and Smart. It could be smart and short.
Does that mean me and Jessie?
I'm not even going to try and come up with a line about that one. No. So this session was prompted, where is he? By Adam G. There he is, somewhere. There he is. So Adam G., who's the commissioner for Real Stories, which is a brilliant platform from Little Lot Studios specialising in short form content. And one of the films that Adam commissioned, I don't know how many of them you commission over the year, but one of them was Victoria's film Missed Call, which is part of your work over the years, I think, on short films and digital art and using smartphones. And probably fair to say that, short form films don't generally get the attention that longer pieces do, and things filmed on phones generally don't get the attention that longer pieces do. But you won a BAFTA, which is, for those not from the UK, a British Academy Film and Television Award for the best short film. That was only a month ago?
Yeah, a few weeks ago. It's a new category as well. That category's only been going since last year.
Yes, and I'm slightly disappointed you didn't bring your BAFTA frock.
It's heavy.
Is it?
It's very heavy.
You could have brought your BAFTA. Anyway, put it on the table. Anyways,
I'll send a picture.
So congratulations for that. And then next to her is Jessie Currie. Jessie is a filmmaker you come from Bristol, you live in Bristol, and your film was shown, your new film was shown last night in the Exchange in the square there, as part of the Different Voices programme. So it's a programme run by Alex, there you go. So with over 104 films, and I've probably got the credit wrong, 104 films, and is it just 104 films? And Bigger House, that's right. Doing this, have done a kind of development program for short form filmmakers who identify as neurodiverse. So just to get it out of the way at the beginning, Jessie.
You want me to do neurodiverse?
Well, or maybe I'll do it and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. Do you want to do that then? So neurodiverse, and I think the Different Voices title of it gives some indication. It's about people who think differently, and that thinking differently can, run the range from autism through ADHD to other forms of dyspraxia, is that the right word? And it's a way of thinking differently, and I think Different Voices is a really great name for the project you've done. And it seemed to me, when I was trying to think of this of these sessions, that it's very important that we do recognise that filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, is all about, we talk a lot about the author's voice and different voices. Sometimes we can be guilty of having the same tone of voice in documentaries, and I think it's brilliant that a project, like yours, is encouraging filmmakers with different ways of seeing the world to make films. So that's what we're going to talk about. But as I say, we're starting from the premise that this is cinema, okay? And we all have to, we all need to accept that, I think, on the basis that we've all got one. We can all do something with it. I mean, when you, Victoria, started making films on a smartphone, was it because you couldn't afford a camera?
It was, I feel like I've had a career in two halves. So in the 90s and 2000s, I was like a self-shooting director making films for Channel 4. And I'd always worked in that kind of intimate sort of one-woman crew, but it was, I don't know, like $8,000 worth of equipment, so like a professional camera and radio mics, and you could very much see me coming, you know. And then I had my son. I was sort of hit a point where I was 38, pregnant, broke, single, and had to readjust whether I was going to have a career in telly, and went into teaching, which I really love. And so the kind of smartphones came out of being a big gap, which I think women often have, annoyingly, in terms of filmmaking. And just at the point when I'd started to write and get back into funding again when my son was a bit older, the smartphones had just about got good enough. So I made a short for Film London in 2015. And one of the things I've noticed, having shot always a self shooter, but in terms of the kit, about how it's really changed my filmmaking. And I was watching Jessie's film this morning, and there's a really beautiful shot of like a radiator, and there's like a sort of light pattern on the radiator. And I was thinking, I get those moments, and it's because you can notice this brilliant thing, and then you've just got the camera right there to do it. So you kind of collect footage more than that really traditional production model, which I used to find kind of worked and didn't work, where you have a 6-week shoot and that's it. And you endlessly, and also I love the speed of, you know, on my most recent film for The Guardian, I shot with a consultant on the Monday and I onlined on the Thursday, and it was in. So I now don't think I could go back. There's, you know, there are limitations. I think I still miss a really good lens, but I can kind of forego that. And also that you sort of embrace the look of it. It does have these funny quirks. It flattens foreground and background. It's got Sean Baker, who made Tangerine, calls it pop verite. It's like very zingy look. And whenever I'm doing a grade, they always want to make it look like more expensive digital. I'm like, no, I actually really like, in sort of real sunny day, it has that kind of really kind of poppy look to it, which I like. So yeah, I don't think I will want to go back.
As I was looking at, you know, what other filmmakers from the fiction world, really, which ones were using smartphones, and I came up with Claude Lelouch, whose new film shown at Cannes, so French filmmaker, new film shown at Cannes this year, was half shot on iPhone, and the one he's just finished. Well, I was going to come to that, yeah. So his new one is entirely shot on iPhone, and then there's the Steven Soderbergh, who made Unsane and
The new one. Yeah.
And the new one that I've now, of course, forgotten, High Flying Bird, which is not about Noel Gallagher, but I don't think it is anyway. Steven Soderbergh film. So anyway, it's become. Do you feel it's now taken off? Is this the moment when we're all be making films with smartphones?
I feel that in a way I've sort of gotten a bit of advantage of the fact that big feature names have now started to kind of work in that way, and I suppose that people feel that sort of legitimizes it somehow.
Yes.
But I definitely run across, you know, when we were doing the Miss Call, there's a funny glitch with smartphone footage in Premiere where it can't cope with it and you have to turn it all into ProRes files, and my editor and I were on the forums trying to find ways around this and sort of workarounds. And all these usually middle-aged guys were going, well, you shouldn't be working on a smartphone. You know, and you know, you do feel now, well, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I think things have changed on it a lot.
So, and Jessie, I remember, I think it might have been when we were talking on the phone a little while ago, you were telling me about how your phone is like a sort of an extension of you. You can't really imagine looking at the world without it, really, or through it.
I do look at the world without my
I'm sure you do. But as a filmmaker,
I feel like it's my auxiliary brain. I mean, I can't function without it because I am so neurodivergent that I'm profoundly dyslexic and I have ADHD, and I find it impossible to function without it as a bit of kit. But having it there, it's like a sketchbook, I guess, in a way that you can just, just when I was coming here, there was a group of, from a church or something, doing a parade with, and it was amazing. It was just happening there, right in front of me, like some priests with incense, and a Madonna walking down the middle of Sheffield High Street,
Oh.
sprinkling it wasn't a figment of my own imagination. I've got the footage there. So I just filmed it. It was amazing. But, you know, I don't carry, a full camera, tripod, everything in, but I could just get it there and then. And it's fantastic.
And I think you were telling me also about sort of an accident you had with your phone.
Yeah, I dropped it in the pancake mixture because there was something very beautiful going on when I was making pancakes one morning, and I just loved the way that the egg was going into the flour and then it formed this, the whole process of it was beautiful. So I started filming it, and dropped it in. Then had to lie to the Genius Bar at the Apple Store. It was in fact sand, and I'm sure it's just a bit of sand in there. But they managed to clean it out, thank God. But yeah.
But I mean, that's also part of, using the. You can get closer with these than you can with a big bit of kit, I guess.
Yeah,
Can't you?
And I love macro. I love going right in, and I love how it goes really out of focus and then goes back in focus, out of focus, and then if you put that on slow-mo, beautiful. You get some lovely effects.
Because I think in the description of the panel, I can't quite remember what I wrote now, but it talks about the smartphone aesthetic and whether we have, given that a lot of people are watching the things that you're doing on phones or on small screens anyway, do you think that we have embraced the aesthetic of making things on phones with, as you say, the sort of what I forget what you call it, the pop
verite.
The pop verite look.
Yeah.
Do you think we've embraced it? I sometimes feel that filmmakers are still trying to have this word of making things look cinematic when that's the way that a lot of people want to watch them.
I think, I've seen just even at Sheffield, there's quite a lot of films, and I think there's a film on Snapchat. There's a fantastic film called Trim Lambda called Cracked Screen, which is shot and made entirely in Snapchat. And I read a good piece in Wired that was sort of in connection with that, about, if you think about, for young kids, our kids, that when my son picks up the phone to film, it's how he's filming it in portrait mode because of those apps. And the piece in Wired was really good. It was sort of saying, is this actually going to change? It was sort of looking at the pros and cons of both formats, between landscape and portrait. But it was saying, are we going to begin to think about cinema now being in portrait rather than in landscape? And I think for, like I say, anyone under sort of 21, they see the world in portrait mode.
Yes.
And I do a combination of the two, I think, in the films.
So let's move on to your to see a bit of Miss Call. I think the first clip is it's either the very beginning or it's quite near the beginning.
It's the very opening of the film.
It is the very opening of the film. So we can get a sense, and then you can maybe fill us in on what the story of it is.
Sure.
So can we play the first clip? So,
Thank you.
So the film is about how our lives are lived through the phones and how the absence or presence of a call or a text message has been crucial in a way to Jim's relationship or non-relationship with his father. Yeah,
it's a sequel to a film, the one I was saying, that was funded by Film London, called 160 Characters. And that looked at the text thread that was buried in a vintage Nokia, because it was those years when I was in touch with and seeing Jim's dad. And so that had the whole story of when we met and broke up and then dealt with an unplanned pregnancy, and then would he be involved as a dad or not? And it was only like 100 texts, which seems like nothing now. Yeah. So that film looks much more at that Nokia thread. And then when that film actually came out, was doing festivals, Jim sort of hit teen years. He was about 13. And he was doing Q&As with me. And I think it was really nice. He was then meeting other people who didn't have like a biological parent in their life. And he got to that point earlier than I thought he would, where he decided he didn't want to meet his dad. And so the commission for Adam G at Real Stories was not necessarily that we actually even would meet his dad, but that we would, because I kind of remained to be convinced really, because his dad had been very clear when he was a toddler that he didn't want to see him. So I was sort of worried that there was just more rejection there, and was it worth it? And I think also the film's about, there's not necessarily a sort of dad-shaped hole in Jim's life, but obviously there's a thing where you're very curious to meet the biological dad. So I think it's portrait of me bringing him up on his own, and I think, you know, families come in all shapes and sizes, and I think it's a sort of celebration of that. And then you're right, it's picking up from 160 characters, it's looking at that opening is about, it sets up the thing that kept me awake till 3 a.m, which is, I haven't spoken to this guy for 11 years. What do I do? Do I cold call him? Do I text? What do I put in the text? And so that became the film, really, with me saying to Jim, well, what, and him being involved in that, which I felt was right. I felt he was that age where he was old enough to be part of that.
Because that's also the way, I mean, I've got early teenage kids as well. That's the way they always want to communicate, isn't it? With a phone, with a text usually, rather than making a phone call. You do it through texting. So for Jim, it was. Did it seem weird that you were making a film with a phone, about a phone, and about a phone message? No.
As you say, that's a seamless part of his world, and I also definitely felt we started off, we did quite a lot of audio recordings, because obviously it's like difficult stuff to talk about. And he hadn't been in the first film, so it was a kind of new thing. And then when we switched, I remember thinking, God, I've got a good podcast here, but like I can't keep on going in audio only, I'm not going to have a film. And the ease of, you know, him looking at a smartphone, which, as you say, he kind of lives and breathes, it was much less intimidating than I think. And also, he hates the faff. I can just imagine if I had a bigger kit, and he even hates it when I want to put like a lapel mic on him, you know. So again, how quick and easy it was, he really liked. And I felt that in Jessie's film as well, that, you know.
So we'll now look at a bit of yours, Jessie. I think you were, particularly in the second film, it's about the small details. We'll look at the first one first, at Introverse, which you made, was that 2 years ago? That was last year, I'm sorry. Sorry, yeah. Apologies, I forgot that too. So that was last year. That was called Introverse. Do you want to set that up at all, or should we just look at it? It was made on the project. I think we're going to watch perhaps the first half of it.
Okay.
Is that all right? Okay, so that's only the first part of the film. Yes, good round of applause. Well done. And you know, I think you've said to me in the past that you love the small details. You've said, I think you're
seek solace in small things.
That's right. And you have a poet in your family. Is that right?
We have quite a few, actually. One published, but nearly all of us write poetry of one form or another. But I think it's focusing in on details and finding beauty in small things kind of helps, certainly me and also my son, sort of cope with. I think being neurodivergent means that you don't have a particular filter, so all information that you're taking in all the time kind of comes at you like a huge wave and can become overwhelming, and that's why, for example, autistic people quite often go into shutdown, or ADHD people need to take themselves off and have a bit of a lie down. Focusing in on details and the beauty of that can bring great relief, and is when I think I see poetry in the world and have moments of being, and where time seems to stand still and you can sort of be at one with yourself, and it's kind of meditative in a way, I guess. Yeah.
And filming is that for you, or making these films that you're making is part of that. I mean, you're not telling a story in that sense, are you? You're creating these poems.
Yeah. I don't think I could do conventional storytelling. I find it very hard to be linear. I'm so tangential that to tell a straight story would be really difficult. Yeah.
I mean, but Victoria, your film does have a story because it chronicles, your and Jim's life, doesn't it? But is there something? I'm not sure we've talked about this before, so this might not work. But is there something about using, as you said, having all your smartphone images in the cloud and having access to any number of images and texts and all of that, is that a different type of storytelling now, do you think, to the sort of linear documentary cinema that we've perhaps grown up on?
I think, when I look back at, you saw at the beginning of that film that I had footage from when he was little up until sort of 10 that would have been shot on mini DV, and what a faff that is, getting the formats and getting it digitized. And of course there's tiny amounts of it in comparison to the smartphone stuff, because I wasn't walking around with a great big, camera very easily. So there was like a little bit of stuff in the home that I used on the camera when I was sort of a self-shooting director for Channel 4. So I like the fact that you shoot more. I like the fact, I think, Jessie, you just said really beautifully just how pleasurable it is. Like, I feel it's much more creative. And when I think about me with the bigger kit, it's quite backbreaking in its way. I know the cameras, you can get really decent cameras that are still much smaller, but I have sort of memories of just your back and got the brace and it being heavy in every sense. And I think, Jessie's films, you just see the sort of beauty of just those moments where, you look at the radiator kind of shadows and you can capture it, or your Catholic kind of procession in Sheffield. And I think there's a massive spontaneity of it. I think that's where I was saying, I'm sounding really evangelical, but it just is. And then the other thing I will say, which is another big bonus, is I've often do talks, and I'll talk about the fact that it allows you to embrace Werner Herzog's manifesto idea that, it means that you can ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And I've been able to film in hospitals and on buses and on tubes because people, think that you're possibly even just watching something. And if you're filming something, I think it also helps being a woman, actually, that there's just an innocence that you're just doing a bit of home movie footage, which, kind of we are, but we take them into a bigger place. And again, I think I really like that. I feel like the bigger kit, you end up with all of that baggage of decades of sort of media behaving badly. People are distrustful of what they see as a film or TV crew, and rightly so, in terms of quite a lot of bad stuff that's gone on over the years. Well, people aren't distrustful of Joe Blogs or, Mrs. Blogs with a smartphone.
Perhaps, and I mean, hopefully, long may it last. I suppose phones could become, if they become ubiquitous and you see them being used by the police or whoever else, you're going to distrust those as well, maybe. I don't know, I'm just suggesting that. So let's go back to your film and look at the second clip of this. Do you want to set this one up, or should we just...
So that the second clip, the film moves towards the decision, we get there, in a way Jim wants to contact his dad, and it takes a while for me to get there, and it moves towards us reaching some kind of resolve on that.
Okay, let's play that next clip then.
I was left on a cliffhanger.
I know.
So I want you to go online and watch the rest of the film, find out what happened in the call.
Very good cliffhanger. So, having both made films, and obviously you're continuing to make films with these, with a smartphone. Smartphone, I remember thinking, doesn't seem like the right word for it anymore because it can do so many things. I thought we should call them omniscient phones now. They're smarter than smartphones now in my view.
They're actually rubbish phones though. They're crap.
Is that right? Yeah, probably.
I think they are. I think this cuts out all the time. It's brilliant as a camera, but it's bloody useless as a phone. I miss the Nokias and just how reliable they were, and the battery life. I think they're rubbish as phones.
So are you both thinking of? What's the next sort of turn of the dial with using a phone? Because as I say, your film is in a way about phones and about phone communication. It's about the father. Is there another turn of the dial that you've thought of ways in which you'd use it? Quite a tricky question, I know.
In terms of different ways of using it?
Yes, or different ways of using the different aesthetic even.
I mean, certainly in terms of the ease of that archive, you know, I talked to you the other night about how my next project is now a feature doc, which is to try and put these shorts in a kind of Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And I think that the ease of that has come out of when we were talking about just how easily all of this stuff that I'm shooting backs up. And then you've got this kind of archive at your fingertips to use, and it's a lot of material. So, yeah, for me, that's come out again of the technology of feeling how sort of easy that is, as relatively easy as a next step.
But you wouldn't want to go down the route of, you know, putting a big rig with cameras and sort of microphones and monitors and gimbals and all the other things that you can put around a smartphone.
Do you know what? For me, the more high-tech stuff gets, the least creative I find it. I find that you get distracted by all the technology. So I've just been doing a VR project recently, and I found that really hard. It was bigger funding. It was the biggest funding I've had in a long time after working on these tiny budgets. And it made me almost nostalgic for, A, the freedom you get on a small budget. Commissioners just leave you to it, don't they? You just can have complete editorial control. But the tech, and I know I got there. I'm really pleased with the final piece, but I found the tech and the levels of layers and also how could you be part of it, because it was a sort of artist commission. And like, I've realized what a kind of process way of working I've got. And I didn't want to just work with a whole team of animators to work in CGI. I wanted to feel a kind of part of it. And so in the end, actually, I went for a 360 take on a really cheap camera. So I tried to sort of took me a while, but I kind of found the low-tech route, self-shooting route, in that world, which was the GoPro Fusion, which,
And is it the same with you, Jessie? Do you think you're happy continuing to work just you and your phone?
Yeah, I think so. Although I did use GoPros in my last shoot as well.
Yeah.
But it's there. It's instantaneous. You can, and you're so free. You can move about. Like yesterday, I've been filming quite a lot since I've been here. I happened to pass a very beautiful, I don't know what you call it, like a stream running through the city centre with mosaics underneath it, and I could just go straight and do it. And then you don't need all the other faff. But yeah, having a good microphone would help sometimes.
These are quite good, aren't they? So, I mean that ability to capture things as you're going. I think the second film, your new film,
which is very niche,
which I've now just forgotten the title of. Excuse me.
Oh my God! Like Never Before.
That's right. Like never before. Thank you. What I'd actually quite like to do, and I'm afraid, Steve, I actually forgot to say that we'd quite like to show the second half of this. If it starts,
with a big reveal.
Yes, it's exactly for the end. It starts at 1:42 in. If it's possible to line it up from that. Apologies for springing that on you, if that's all right. And I think your son, who we hear in the car there, had a description for that film, I think.
Yeah, so it's very niche. So all right, if you're into traffic cones, which I am. But it's not very explained, any of it. But yeah.
No, and that sort of the repetitive nature of the images, is that something that particularly that you particularly like?
Yeah, I think we both my son and I, what we enjoy when we're in the car is just really getting into cones flashing by, and particularly what unites us is going over that bridge and the bridge kind of spreading out, and we get completely sort of enveloped by it, and kind of brings us an enormous sense of peace actually when we get to the other side of the bridge. But I remember someone else who has ADHD came up to me after the first screening of it and said, I totally relate to that editing. Loads of, and sort of getting drawn in by things going, and like the joy of seeing chevrons open up on the side of the road. Oh, gorgeous. But yeah.
Wonderful. Well, look, I wanted to finish actually, Adam, sorry to spring this on you slightly, but Real Stories is now an established platform, and you are a commissioner of short form content. What would you say the rest of the broadcast and cinema medium is missing about short form that you're doing? Just so that we can get a sense of how these films fit into the bigger picture. Sorry, and can I give you this microphone maybe?
Well, I think the main thing for me is that it's a form in its own right, so not to be looked at as a stepping stone to doing features. Obviously that's different from scripted, where short dramas are a stepping stone to doing features, but in the unscripted space it's very much like the difference between a novel and a short story. And what's really interesting about that is that lots of novelists are pretty lousy short story writers, and the same applies here. So yes. People that have grown up with a baggage of television production aren't particularly good at making short form films, and in fact people that are new to the game are just as likely to come up with the goods as the sort of veterans. So on that level it's quite an optimistic picture and full of opportunity.
There are a couple of sessions, in fact, tomorrow, I think, not sure if I've written them down, but about the commissioning of short forms. Of short form films. You're possibly on that panel.
I'm chairing one on Monday at noon. I've forgotten where it is, but I think it might be this building. Exactly,
and I think there's something that involves round table pitching. If there are people with ideas who want to, or here who might want to explore the form or possibilities, not quite sure how that works, whether it needs prior registration or whatever, but worth finding out about, because I think there's and there are obviously some great shorts here, including being shown, in programs. I think there's one tomorrow morning as well, but there are programs of short films, so I would encourage you to check those out. So we're going to take, so thanks Adam. I also meant to say, actually, I was looking up the number of short form, let's call them unusual, film festivals around. Mobile Film Festival just happened in Zurich. The Dublin Smartphone Film Festival happening in January 2020. A Toronto Smartphone Film Festival happening from next Wednesday. And there's, Australia, where I mostly work for, there's a vertical film festival in a place called Katoomba, which I just think is rather brilliant, a vertical film festival. Yes, that's right. The funding and information, commissioning information session is actually here. It's in the town hall at 12 on Monday, possibly not in this room, and then a session on Tuesday called Some Like It Short, which includes roundtable pitches with commissioners from a range of platforms. So I just wanted to say that now we can take some questions. Have you still got that microphone? Yeah. Thanks. So question at the front there. Oh, apologies. Is the microphone person? No, it's all right. A microphone is winging its way to you. There you go, to the left.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Victoria, just because I can tell from watching Jessie's films and I couldn't from Victoria's, how much of that is filmed so for instance, when we're seeing a screenshot of your phone, are you filming that somehow from within the phone, or are you using another phone to film your phone? So, like, can you phone when somebody's typing, are you able to phone sorry, I'm using the word phone and the word film too much. Right. Are you able to film like a screenshot? Do you have some kind of app?
So it's a combination of, I can record screenshot on the phone itself or on my laptop. So sometimes it's that.
Okay.
And then we had a brilliant motion graphics guy who sometimes built stuff like that opening title sequence.
Yeah,
when
that's
it's
what I
the
couldn't
kind
tell.
of, yeah, then it's slicker a bit. He was amazing, and so we had this kind of motion graphics guy building some of them.
So some of that is recreated. You haven't managed to
In After
somehow.
Effects, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, there's one standing up at the back. I recognise you.
Thank you. I don't have actually a question. I just want to say one thing, because I'm the composer, of course, but I'm a fan, absolute fan of mobile photography and cinematography, and thank you for your work. It's great. I just wanted to say that just yesterday, Sony released a phone with real cinematography options, like recording videos in 21:9 ratio, and some real camera filters. I've seen the results. It's just stunning. Just wanted to say it in addition to what's going on. That's it.
No, and that's
It's Xperia 1. It's coming. I've seen some commercials and some real footage. It's stunning. It's shocking a bit.
And you know, there is an app that you can get called Filmic Pro, which I think
I've got
is
it
it
on my phone.
£13.99 or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's $14.99. There you go. So, and exactly, and you can do all sorts of things with that. I'm sure other apps are available. So you know, you can. I'm sure there's a huge wealth of possibilities for using the phones. Any other questions? One over there at the back. Can the microphone find its way around?
Hello, I loved all the films. Do you ever have, I don't know if they've been broadcast on TV, but if they were going to be, would there be a problem with the quality?
Good question.
With broadcast quality?
I don't think so. I remember, you know, when I was sort of talking about almost a career in two halves, and I remember there being, in my early career, loads of resistance to self-shooting and to shooting. I'm old enough that I was shooting on high 8 when I began. But I think now there was that really excellent, it was Exodus, the BBC series, which I think a lot of that was cut by Nick Fenton, who's a friend of mine, and I think a lot of that was mobile phone. So there have been broadcast films that have used it. So I think there's been a big change. When I used to find, like I say, TV was quite old-fashioned, I think, in the 90s, about everything had to be the right spec. And again, what that did, it gatekeepered, really. It meant that lots of people working in a low-budget way, working in a more intimate way, were out of the picture. And I think what's great is, you know, so much of Exodus was the people who were actually making those journeys, the asylum seekers, and they were shooting it themselves, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to tell a better story than some director flying in on the boat for 5 minutes and then off again.
That's right. I mean, but to be fair on the BBC, my old employee, they did also
That never worked for them, so I can
no, but they did also, you know, from the 90s, even before, have the community programs unit.
They did have the Video Nations.
And that,
yes,
and Video
and there
Nation
was
came
some
out of that, and that was all with high 8 cameras, and yes, and you're probably right that the, you know, tech review department of the BBC was sort of sitting there going, is this really what we should be showing on our broadcast network? But you know, thankfully they did carry on doing it.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts, questions? Yes, good. Sorry, can I have the person behind the person in black, so in grey there? I sound like David Dimbleby or Fiona Bruce or something.
I really enjoyed both films as well, but Victoria, you've obviously had funding, which is fantastic, and you mentioned grading. I'd never thought of grading mobile phone material, and I just wondered what you both are editing on. And you have an editor, Jessie, I imagine you don't.
I'm terrible at editing. I get distracted and stuff. Yeah, I edit on Final Cut Pro, and I have an editor, basically.
Sorry, you do have an editor?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
You know, I tell them what to do. But yeah, Tom Stubbs. Where would we be without Tom Stubbs?
I do too. I think in a way, when you're making these really personal autobiographical films, it's like, and you've done most of it, I think you do need a second pair of eyes and this kind of skills of an editor. So I've always cut with an editor, and I work on Premiere, which actually didn't like smartphone footage for a long time. And again, it's interesting just to see how those platforms begin to get it. So Premiere couldn't cope with GoPro and smartphone footage because it's got a variable frame rate, which would knock it all out of sync and give you loads of tech problems. So you had to put it all into ProRes. And the latest version in like January of this year got it right. So it's nice to see them sort of catching up.
Great, thank you. So then there was a question in front of you, gentleman, the black jumper.
Hi there. Thanks for that. I was wondering what your perspective is on sound. It's usually one of the challenges with small format cameras is that they usually make it more challenging to get good sound and good atmos and to adjust levels while shooting and that sort of thing. I just want to hear a little bit about that. And also whether, potentially another question is, do you see, I know that we've talked about the accessibility of having a small camera, but do you see the use of having a sound recordist now?
You mean working with a sound recordist?
Yeah, working with a sound recordist on set, in the field.
Because again, you know, I've been working with a sound mixer recently who was appalled by the quality of my sound, but it is, and it's a combination of, you know, sometimes I'm recording, I've just had breast cancer and I made a whole film about that, which was actually very much easier because I was able to shoot on the phone, and I use it to record consultation audios, so you can imagine that sound is going to be relatively rough. For the gym sync interviews or any kind of sync interviews, I'll use like a Smart Lav lapel mic, which is made for the kind of goes into the mobile phone. Which gives you problems because then the stabilizer knocks out because you've now got a cable in, so it's a bit tricky. And then I've got a Zoom recorder, which I will sometimes, I mean, it's really rough and ready, you know, and then I'll put the Zoom recorder near me and that will mic me. So, you know, it is externally recorded sound, but it's rough and ready, but it kind of does, you know. And no, I wouldn't want a sound recordist with me. Really?
Sorry to any sound recordists in the room.
And it's not that I don't get what an amazing skill that is, but it's another body, and they wouldn't be there when I was picking up the camera, you know.
Okay, I think was there a question there? That gentleman there, his hand up there.
Hi there. I came to this session a bit kind of skeptically, really, because I come from a more traditional filmmaking background, but been so persuaded by what you've said. And I think it might be time for my film on lampposts. But I was just wondering if I could play devil's advocate just for a sec. Do you think that the ubiquity of mobile phones and how easy they are to use might have a detrimental effect on the craft of filmmaking somehow? I mean, is there any equation between the effort of having a camera, you know, quite a heavy camera with a big lens, and the effort needed to compose things nicely, and quality?
Good question.
I actually think that both Jessie and I, you feel like we've got an eye.
Yeah.
You know, I bet you're a good photographer, and
I was a photographer.
yeah,
originally.
you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
And I don't actually think it's. I mean, I think, you know, what's great about the way you can shoot is that you look like an amateur, but you're still shooting like a professional. And I've seen, you know, I teach smartphone filmmaking to my master's students, and, you know, it's a mixed bag. So I still think, actually, you do need filmmaking skills to kind of bring it to life in a kind of elegant way. If you haven't got that, I mean, I just think, you know, what's really come across is the absolute pleasure we take in filmmaking. And I think if we didn't have that, you see that in the work. And so I don't actually think it will work that everybody can just pick. I think what's great is that it's accessible enough. And I think also people who aren't so good at filming will use it. Like, you know, films don't get made off paper anymore. So I think it's very useful, even if you're not going to craft the final film in a smartphone. It's like a really great way of moving things on. You know, that's how you get better as a filmmaker. So I think it works at both ends, really.
Okay, well, I'm sure that's a conversation that can run and run. Perhaps it can run and run over drinks, which are going to be downstairs now. I'd like to thank very much Victoria and Jessie. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you.